Life can be really hard, and as we get older, we learn this along the way. But wouldn't it be good to know how we could live longer and happier lives? Stay tuned to learn exactly that. So in today's video, I'm going to talk about how we can live longer and happier lives, because those two things together are very important, aren't they? Now, this is based on a case study. So this is a client I had. So I'll give you a bit of a context around his life, what it taught me, but also I'm going to show you or tell you how you can live long and happier lives based on a Harvard study, which was probably the longest Harvard study or study actually research of this kind. And it tells us exactly how or what we need to focus on in order to live longer, but also happier lives. First, I'll introduce my client. This is Mick, or that's how I refer to him anyway. And the reason I chose this name is because Mick's from the East End, as my client was. And I'm very grateful to him for not only being my client, honoring me with his story, but also allowing me to share this so that it might help others. And because he was such an amazing light for me in a way. Let's talk about Mick and his life. Let me give you the context in which I saw him. I was working in the public sector service and we had 6 sessions because of the restrictions of that service. So this is a very short time frame within which to see a client. Mick came to me and we did our initial psychometrics, which are the psychological questionnaires that we use. And these ones specifically measure anxiety and depression. Mick came with what's termed as mild anxiety and mild depression. He wasn't quite in the non-clinical range, which is, the normal day-to-day anxieties, depression, what the general population experiences. And he wasn't in the moderate, so like the mid-level or the severe range for anxiety and depression, but he was mildly anxious and depressed. And this is quite interesting because as I got to know more about Mick, I actually wondered, where did he get this pool of resilience that made it so that he was actually only mildly anxious and depressed rather than quite a bit more than that? I did wonder this as our sessions wore on at times, and it started to become apparent to me over time. And of course, this Harvard study that I'll mention later on or talk a bit more about will also illuminate a bit more. So Mick, let's talk about him. So we've got 6 sessions and he's mildly anxious and depressed. So this is someone whose son had actually contacted the service, and there'd been a bit of a back and forth because Mick didn't really want to access the service, but his son felt like he really needed to do it. Now, that means his son was certainly seeing or witnessing something that was going on and felt like his father might be being proud. This is someone who was 79 years old as we had our therapy together. He turned 80. And so he was of a different generation, and his son just felt like he was desperate, in desperate need for his father to access help. And so let me tell you about Mick's wife, Anne, as she'll be known. Mick wasn't a widower, but he certainly had lost Anne in ways because Anne was in a care home because she had severe dementia. She was in the final stages of the disease, the incredibly cruel disease, and she was having to be cared for around the clock, something Mick couldn't do because of his own ailing physical health. Another thing that I wondered, how Mick was able to keep so upbeat with me in sessions most of the time. That's what was happening there. And this was happening during COVID, which meant that there were many months when Mick and his children, his adult children, couldn't visit Anne in the care home. They couldn't check in on her. They couldn't see how she was being cared for, how she was doing. And this was quite distressing for them as a family because they had had experiences at the care home that were quite worrying for them. So I'll give you some examples. One time they'd gone to the care home and Anne had been there looking very confused, and she looked quite disheveled and she wasn't wearing her own clothes. And what I mean by that is Mick had said to me that the clothes that she was wearing, the clothes that she was given to take with her, her own clothes, had all had her name sewn into them so that, this very thing wouldn't happen. And yet she wasn't in her own clothes. Another time, Anne's daughter wanted to take a selfie with Anne because Anne was experiencing a good day. And this was just because it was a happier time, I guess. And she just wanted to memorialize that. Unfortunately, she was threatened with eviction from the care home. And this was quite distressing for everyone involved. And then another time, they found that the gold bracelet that Mick had gifted to his wife in the 60s, which was worth a few £100s back then, but it was worth so much more in terms of sentimental value, was missing. And this was quite upsetting for the family. These were just some of the examples of the things that they'd experienced. And so when COVID hit and they couldn't go and visit Anne, they were so upset and distressed and really found it difficult because they couldn't comfort Anne. They couldn't be there for her. And they just wondered what she must have thought about their absence. And so this was going on. Mick also had real painful physical conditions, and these had to be managed by health professionals who would come in almost daily to administer injections, to change bandages, and to help Mick be comfortable. The other thing that Mick was going to do was have a cataract operation, and this meant that he was nearly blind in his good eye. He couldn't do the puzzles that he enjoyed doing, and so he was really unable to just enjoy or distract himself from a lot of the things that were going on. And so again, I wondered how was Mick able to be so upbeat and laugh with me in sessions? And I often tried to get him to go to the places that maybe he wasn't wanting to go to, just to see if I could help him a little bit. And, there were glimpses of things at times, but Mick often went back to what I thought at times, was he protecting me? Was he trying to keep me feeling okay and good? And, this just really showed the kind of spirit of this person. We worked together over time, and I just wondered, how did Mick manage this? And then over time, as I got to know him, I realized it was because of something that he and Anne had done. And this is that they had really nurtured this aspect of their life. And what I'm talking about here is relationships, because Mick had 2 children, adult children, and they had children as well. So he had grandchildren that were a bit older as well. And they would often come and visit. They would take Mick out for the day, go to the fish and chip shop every week with his grandchildren, his grandsons. And all of this really helped Mick to feel fulfilled in his life. It gave him purpose, it gave him interaction, it gave him a feeling of being cared for, and whatever else those kinds of relationships do for us as human beings, we need these. And so this is what I saw happening for Mick, and it's the only answer I could come to, other than Mick was trying to protect me. But actually, when we did his psychological questionnaires again, there was a change. Mick was no longer clinically depressed or anxious. He was back into the normal range for people in the population, the general population. So he was actually in a different place. And this is something that I could trust, not to say I didn't trust Mick, but essentially what I'm saying is his mood did improve over time, but it's just that he was experiencing difficulty. And I could trust that what he was presenting to me was in fact what he was feeling at the time, and mildly anxious and mildly depressed. And it was due perhaps, I think, in great part to those strong relationships he had, even though he had so much adversity to contend with. And he was living alone in this tower block flat without Anne, his companion that he'd known for so many years. And yet he had these children and grandchildren that he could rely on, and that made him feel safe and like he belonged somewhere. Now, this Harvard study really exemplified this learning. I once saw a TED talk by someone called Robert Waldringer, and in this he discussed this Harvard study. This study was one of the longest of its kind, if not the longest. It began in 1938 and it was still running in 2016 at the time of Robert's video. It tracked 724 men over 75 years. That's a long time. These were men of varying backgrounds. They were bricklayers. They were from some of the most deprived neighborhoods. They were judges. They were lawyers. One of them was the future president, John F. Kennedy. These were people from all walks of life. So annually, these participants were tracked in terms of their physical health, their mental health, their bloods were taken, lots of tests were done. And these men were 19-year-olds at the time of the beginning of the study. Some of them had been in World War II. And all of these people were from Boston. So these were, and as I said, some from the most deprived parts of Boston, different walks of life. And then there's the more affluent families as well. So as time progressed, the researchers found that some of these men developed things like schizophrenia and alcoholism and other difficulties. And then there were the ones who didn't. The reason they found for this was actually because of the good relationships that those people had who tended to experience less adversity. These people were living longer and they were living happier lives because of the quality of their relationships. So that's really key as well, the quality of the relationship. So there were 3 findings from this study. One was social connections are really good for us, whereas loneliness kills. That means that loneliness takes years off our life, or we might actually have relationships that are quite toxic. Again, this harms us. So we really need to focus on nurturing our social connections and relationships. The other finding was it's about the quality of the relationships that counts. So again, we don't want to have hundreds of friends and feel alone. We need to have those few friends or family members or both who we feel connected to, who we know we can rely on if we need them. It's actually worse if we're in relationships that entail conflict and strife. This is actually very damaging for us. Whereas if we have relationships that feel warm and nurturing and in which we feel safe, we are then experiencing those kinds of quality relationships that serve us. So good relationships protect our bodies and our brain health. What I mean there is that we need to be in those relationships. And this doesn't mean that we don't experience ups and downs in relationships, because in fact, secure relationships can withstand difficulties and challenges, which sometimes might happen. There are ups and downs, but it's about the quality and that security in that relationship and whether overall we're feeling quite safe and we know we can rely on those people. And this is vital for our well-being. So the important lesson to take from Mick and from this Harvard study is that it's not about fame, wealth, money, glory, whatever it is that people focus on nowadays. It's actually about leaning into our relationships and making sure that we nurture this aspect of our lives, because it is big, but it can really serve us well. It can mean that we experience fulfillment in this very big part, or what should be a very big part of our lives. So if you want to live long and live well, like Mick, if you want to be able to lean into those relationships to feel safe and secure as you traverse through life, even with its adversities, but be able to withstand the adversities, to feel like you have that well of resilience, so that even when you have all those difficulties going on, as Mick did, you're maybe only mildly anxious or mildly depressed and can come through it maybe a bit quicker, a bit easier, with the support of those loved ones around you. So nurture your social connections. Maybe try not to be too engrossed in the ones that we experience in the virtual world, and just focus on those around you and enriching their lives and your own life. Hopefully that'll help us all to live long and meaningful lives with meaningful connections. So I hope Mick's lesson and the Harvard study can help us all do this. And do subscribe, do like this video if you did, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again. Bye for now.